Can everyone see the screen?
I think I heard somebody say not really, but
I got a poll
Do you want to
anyway.
trade spots? I can move
He's
Do
standing.
you want to come up here?
over here.
Okay. Would you like to come up here?
Yeah, move that here.
Can you sneak for a spot?
Sure.
I know it's difficult for everybody to see, but just from everybody's perspective, would it be easier if we moved the screen to the
Yes.
center of the room? When we
Yeah.
put the center of the room? I think we need to do that though, if we can.
Center?
Yeah, over here.
Yeah, but I know.
It's okay, I can adjust.
Okay.
I know some people sitting back here might have to move over to the right.
No kidding. Thank you, Bob.
So while we're waiting, I just want to tell everybody that there was a ribbon cutting ceremony at the Country Club today for the new restaurant, Country Club. Went off very well. I think everybody in town should be excited about the fact that we have a new restaurant and country club in town. So for those of you that were unable to make it, it was very nice. And for those of you that haven't been out there to check it out, you should go check it out. It's a nice facility.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. We've been working at trying to put something like this on for a while. As you know, we've had a number of projects going on in town. And by the way, my name is Joe Giordano, the town supervisor. I have Greg Swart with us today. He's our town engineer, and Tom Cunningham, also a board member. So today's presentation is to talk about water projects and about sewer projects, and specifically what's happened in the last 15 years in terms of projects of both types, and which ones we're proposing in the upcoming years, in the next 15 years, and just to kind of give a flavor for the folks that are here, and also for the folks that are watching online. Many of you probably are aware of what's going on the Portage, as well as the new water supply that was put online a couple of years ago on Street Road. And so what we wanted to do is kind of give a very high-level overview on the town, on projects in the town, why they're needed, how they're determined to be needed based on the state mandates and so forth. And then kind of share the locations in town where we're working on, where we've worked on certain projects and where we're proposing working on certain projects. And then talk about how that relates into the rates. The rates are obviously a mix of what it takes to operate day by day, as well as the projects that we do periodically, and the debt service of those projects in the long term. So it's a very high-level overview to kind of give the public a sense as to where we've been, where we are, and where we're looking to go based on our water and our sewer system. So we're going to keep it to about 15 minutes for the sewer and 15 minutes to the water, but we're going to do one first, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A as an opportunity just for people to ask questions pertaining to what's been shared, and then we'll proceed with the next presentation. So, okay, so with that, I will pass it on to Greg. And
Where do you want me?
wherever you want to be. Good.
So, as Joe mentioned, the presentation today, both presentations were intended them to be pretty high level, so there's only a few slides each. Try not to get into too much detail, but I'm happy to answer as many detailed questions as I can. As we get into the proposed projects, these are pretty early stages planning and meant to be kind of the kickoff of planning, so there'll be plenty of time to have more detailed conversations as we go over probably the next couple of years. But we just wanted to get kind of started on why we're working on planning some of the next projects out. So we'll start with sewer. As you guys, everybody here, I'm sure realizes there's been projects going on in town for quite a long time. We try to focus on roughly the last 10 or 15 years, because that's one of the era of projects that either I've been involved in, or if I have been involved in them, they have kind of the hallmark of planning, grant funds, and such. The biggest one clearly is the Portage right now going on. The whole Portage reconstruction is based on sewer funding. I'm just going to go a little bit of the history of some of the projects where they've come from, and then I'll go into some of the new ones that are potentially coming up. We'll make the presentation available at a later date once we're completed the presentation, but there's a bunch of abbreviations I use. I will try to circle back to them if I need them. You don't need to necessarily memorize them all, but if you have any clarification, just let me know. For sewer, going back to roughly 2008, been quite a few projects and large-scale projects that have been funded. There's been a number of smaller ones. I didn't include everything that's happened in town, but I tried to get the biggest ones out there. For sewer, the main goal for Ticonderoga Sewer is to separate stormwater from the sanitary sewer. Back in the 70s-ish, the sewer systems were intentionally combined. Stormwater and sanitary were intentionally combined because stormwater should be treated, and it was a good, probably well-intentioned, but at the end of the day, the system just can't handle the amount of stormwater that comes. So, since at least 2008, we've been working to separate stormwater from sanitary, and then as well as upgrade the wastewater treatment plant, which was built in the 70s and has just basically reached its capacities and reached its lifespan on many things. So we worked to upgrade those both as requirements from state mandates and as necessary upgrades. So the projects started out with Alexandria Ave. There's a stormwater separation project to collect stormwater partly off Mount Defiance, stormwater on Alexandria Ave, and discharge it to Lachute directly, getting it off the collection system. There was a Water Street sanitary sewer project, which was mainly focused on replacing an aged sanitary sewer, which had direct sanitary sewer overflows caused by stormwater coming in and poor pipes. So that replaced the pipe along water up behind Water Street up through Lake George, and I've got a map to show you in a minute. And then the first major upgrade of the treatment plant occurred about 10 years ago. That involved the upgrade of kind of the front end of the plant. So spray removal and screening is what happens at the beginning of the plant. Everything there was basically undersized for the size of the plant before coming in, so that increased those capacities, which ultimately reduces overflows that occurred at the plant. So all of that work occurred, and this was right around when the stimulus package happened during Obama's first term from the economic crash. So we were able to work with the town to both secure grant funds for the wastewater treatment plant upgrades and actually refinance those earlier projects to have better terms and zero interest loan and almost $3.5 million, or over $5 million of grant. So pretty much, roughly 2/3 in grant and 1/3 in loan. And then there's a couple of smaller projects that occurred. Since then, there's Meyer Street Sewer and John Street Sewer, which were little OCR grants, which are 100% grant projects. It's Office of Community Renewal, which is HUD. And so those are completed to fix aging sewer systems there. And then there was the North Main and St. Clair Street sewer separation. That one was actually not grant funded, it was funded out of the budget, but that was also to replace sanitary sewers and separate sewers to prevent overflows on property of that area. And then the biggest one is the current project that's wrapping up with the Portage right now. That started out with, the impetus behind that was at the wastewater treatment plant adding disinfection, it was a state mandate. That state mandate led us to be able to get $2.5 million grant. It led us to get 0% loan and led to the starting of some other grants that were coupled to it. So we also included the grant to put in the stream that's out here. And the goal of that stream was to make a place to discharge the stormwater that is will be coming off the Portage with the project wrapping up in the next few months. I believe the first drops of stormwater heading that way into the last storm as the project is wrapping up. It looks like it's a long way from wrapping up, and it is, but the majority of the work has actually been done that is related to the utilities, so now we're rebuilding the road. But that project we were able to secure an extra $5 million grant for the Portage specifically, and then a $2.5 million grant overall. So we were able to get over 50% in grant for those 3 projects, and it comes from coupling them all together with the disinfection requirement, and then ultimately the goal of separating stormwater. So we're actually able to rebuild the road using the sewer grant, ability to get grants for the sewer project to rebuild the road. And we're actually replacing the water main on the road at the same time. So that's kind of the quick high-level view of the big projects that happened in the last roughly 15 years. Again, from overall state mandates to separate stormwater, but also the separate one for adding disinfection. But we're able to use those to go after the grant dollars. So just as a kind of a map of the work that was complete. So the yellow in the map are the various streets. There's the Portage here. Clearly there's Alexandria Ave, the Water Street project, St. Clair, John Street, Meyer Street. And we try to do is showing the yellow kind of expanded area. Those are the properties that are essentially served by those areas. There are obviously a few others that's not all encompassing, but it kind of shows the area of town that we've been able to work on from a separation standpoint. And then the wastewater treatment plant is down here for also those projects. So as many projects as we have completed and worked on, there's still vast areas of town that we have not worked on in terms of large capital. So that's kind of a quick and dirty overview of the existing projects. Anybody have any questions at the moment? You want to?
No, good. Yeah. Anyone have any questions?
Joe, I do have one question.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Part of the project originally was some of your side streets, like Defiance Street, those type of things. Are they going to be happening in the future, or only if grants are available, or what's the projection for that?
For the current project, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
So within the budget that we ended up with, we're separating the storm lines on Defiance and connections on Battery Street. We weren't able to do the sanitary sewer replacement on Defiance for this particular project, so that will have to roll into a new one. But we were able to separate the storms, and a lot of the one thing on the Portage that is kind of a key point too is there's actually streams that come off of Mount Defiance that are collected by the sanitary sewer system, the combined system, and go to the treatment plant. So we're actually collecting all of the water off Mount Defiance right now. That was all been separated now, or will be as the project is wrapping up. So that's part of Defiance that was completed.
So you're telling me the water that's coming off Mount Defiance now is going to the sewage treatment plant or not? It's being separated and going into the chute?
It's being separated. So up until now, it's been well, actually, it's still going to the wastewater treatment plant as of today. By the end of the year, it'll go to the chute directly through the new stream that's out here.
Wow, I didn't know that. I live across the street. I thought that water was going right straight through our sewer system.
Well, it has been.
It has been.
Sewer
It has
system,
been.
yes.
That's what I mean. So
Yeah.
I thought you said it had been corrected.
Right now, the Portage is
That's what
correct.
At the end of the project, at the end of the Portage project, when it's completed, it will take all the water from Mount Defiance and that area and run it through the daylight stream that's out back there.
I'm confused. You're talking about Mount Defiance, you're talking about across the street from my house?
Talking about the entire, well, here, let's back up, just to be clear.
I know up by, up at the other end of Mount Defiance, yes.
So, So this yellow area right here, most of this yellow area, not the line is the road, right? And that's the sewer line itself.
Right.
But the yellow area is an area that is taking the stormwater runoff and is now putting it separated and running it through the daylight stream, eventually run through the daylight stream out here. So as much runoff, of course, you can't grab everything, right, because it's nature, right? But as much runoff that comes off of Mount Defiance, the mountain itself, will run off into the stormwater separation and end up in the daylight stream. So that's where we think we've got.
So just I think, just to back up, I don't know how many people are aware of the different means by which we collect stormwater and sewer in different towns. So Ticonderoga is a rather larger town than other towns in the Adirondacks. And I think it might be helpful, maybe Grady could kind of explain. Our system is a combined system. And so by combined, it means it takes stormwater and it puts it in with the sewer system and then brings it all down to the treatment plant to be treated. Not all towns do this. This was a philosophy back in the day of bringing it together to treat them as a simplified way of doing that. The problem is now that we've had these large storms and we have you can see that the amount of area, and Ticonderoga was kind of a bit of a bowl in terms of the northern part of the lake, right, as it feeds down to the Lachute. And so all this water is being collected into the sewer system now and taking it to the treatment plant. When it gets to the treatment plant, when we have a heavy rain, the treatment plant can't treat it all. And so therefore it bypasses the treatment process, directly taking raw sewage and having that go into the river. And then that feeds down into Lake Champlain. So this is kind of unique, not unique, but this is kind of similar to Plattsburgh, to Syracuse, some of the larger cities, where this was the philosophy back in the day, let's all combine it and then treat it together. However, as you can tell, as we've grown the system and we have a lot more roads and a lot more stormwater capacity, it's now becoming a problem because our treatment plant can't handle millions of gallons of water treated when we have a rainstorm. So this project, like other projects, is really trying to now redirect, if you will, or reverse what was done decades ago, and basically now separate stormwater from sewer and treat them differently. Because sewer needs to be treated much more stringently than stormwater would. So that daylight stream out here is a mimicking of nature to allow the effects of a stream to help to clean the water, so to speak, and bring it to the chute, and everything else is being collected as it should be into our sewer system. So I don't know if you want to share just maybe how other towns might handle this. They don't really have a combined,
Most of the other towns in this general area have separate storm sewers and sanitary sewers. So the stormwater is collected separately. There's many of them that have issues with stormwater getting into their system, so they're doing similar things, replacing pipes and separating out stormwater, but the intention was not to have it originally combined. So they're just essentially fixing leaky pipes. Here, the pipes were intentionally combined together, and we're working to separate those out. Part of the reason why we do bigger projects like this instead of just disconnecting one spot is because everything is very old and in poor condition, so we're looking to replace the pipes and separate them at the same time. And that's how a lot of the grant dollars are structured. The grant dollars are based on the needs and requirements and basically how wrong the system is doesn't help us generate better grant dollars. So there's a kind of a strategy going into how we structure the projects, and it's based on how we get those grant dollars. To circle back to your point on the streams on the portage, I apologize for the confusion, but they're literally separating them as we speak. So sometime in the next month or so, those streams that were connected to the sanitary sewer system going to the treatment plant are being disconnected. As the storm pipe goes up the portage, they're connecting in those side streets and doing so. So they may be connected today, or then they may not be tomorrow, essentially, quite literally. So there's a ton of detail, there's years of work, there's lots of planning that goes into all these things. I'm happy to dive into all kinds of detail, but I'm pretty sure it would bore most of you to death, so I was trying to keep it kind of high level. But I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have.
any other questions?
So this is the existing, kind of where we are today, and then I'm sure everybody would love to just be done with projects, but unfortunately, there's still a lot of the collection system left to work on. It's all 100 years old or nearing there, some of it older. There's a lot of age system out there, and there's still a fundamental, significant part of the system that's combined that has to be separated. And when I have to, most of that comes from state mandates and requirements. So there's a few projects that are in the planning, but kind of the goal today was to share with the public what some of those projects are and we're planning them and some of the reasoning behind them. There's still plenty of decisions to be made on which ones move forward and how they move forward, but this is kind of where we are today and why we're getting there. So one of the mandatory projects that's out there is a change to the permit for the wastewater treatment plant regarding phosphorus, one of the pollutants, and that generates the need to do some additional upgrades at the plant. There's one main component of the plant that has not been upgraded with all the other projects. It would be included with this one. We've estimated that at about 1.3 million, and we're anticipating that there'll be grant dollars out there for that. If there's grant dollars out there for that, we will apply for them. If not, then we may find other ways to meet some of those needs and meet the requirements, but for the time being, those type of requirements from the state are what lead us to potential grant dollars, so we go after all of those. The next one is the ventilation system at the plant is outdated. The codes and standards in the 70s when it was built are different than they are today, and it's 50 years old or more, and those need to be replaced. We've actually secured $1 million grant for that project with a original project cost of about $3 million. That actually is a pretty high estimate. When we're doing reports and planning for grants, we estimate pretty high. So it's closer to $2 million, but that's still a lot of money, obviously. So that is not fully mandated project. It is a health and safety for the health workers at the plant, for the longevity of the equipment, because the gases at a wastewater treatment plant are very corrosive and dangerous. So the goal with upgrades is to remove those gases and make a safer work environment. And then the next one that is also mandatory, although there's still some time on it, is that whole stormwater separation issue. That is a mandate. They call it a long-term control plan for the town. It is part of the permitting process, and we have to continue on with the next project. So the exact project hasn't been developed yet. It's really early planning stages, but it likely will be in the Champlain, Lake George, Amherst area. There's quite a few connected pipes, and there's quite a few old pipes. I've been walking through and investigating some of them. There's some things that are in pretty rough shape that need to be replaced. And if we're lucky enough to get the grant that we got for the portage, it'd be a $5 million grant with out of an $8.8 million estimate. And some of that comes from all the different requirements for the grants and how those work. But basically the goal being to use all of the requirements that the town is under from the state to go after as many grant dollars as we can. If we don't secure some of those grants, then the projects would be rescoped. At these early stages, we kind of think big and broad and hope for the best, and if we get them, great, and if we don't, then we regroup and work on timelines with the state to make sure we're staying in compliance. But one of the things that we try to do is group things together. The ventilation project by itself doesn't score very well in terms of getting good grant dollars, other than the $1 million that we got. Everything is based on a score, but by pairing it with the requirement for phosphorus removal, we're able to actually secure a 0% loan, which we just found out we're eligible for last week. And that's worth several $1 million actually, whereas the ventilation project on its own would not qualify for that. So I was thinking about this the other day, it's kind of like car insurance and home insurance, you bundle them to save money. So that's kind of the goal and why we're working on planning some of these requirements. The one that's completely due and required first is the phosphorus removal in the next couple of years. And then the other thing we started looking at is the pump station. I believe there's 13 pump stations in the collection system. We did an evaluation of them earlier this year. A lot of them are in need of replacements and upgrades. They're just, even the newest ones are 20, 25 years old, and that's about how long mechanical equipment lasts. Those don't have, at this point, any particular grant dollars associated with them. We may be able to gain some, but those will probably be done in smaller projects to do upgrades. Some of the water sewer staff can handle themselves. Some of them require a little bit more work. Overall, if we were to do it as a big project, it'd be about $2 million. I don't expect that we would spend that much or do that all at once, unless for some reason we're able to get a grant program for it, but that's unlikely, so we will just work on budgeting that over the next few years. But it is something that needs to be taken care of. Despite all the other work that we've done, we've got 13 pump stations out there that require maintenance and upgrades. And this is just the general plan. There are other sewer lines out there and other issues, but we can't tackle everything at once. We try to pick something that's somewhat manageable, even though we do realize that there's a lot of money, a lot of dollar figures up here, and the town board has to decide how far you want to go with it. But when we're planning, we try to put out, cast our big net, see what we can get out there, and if we get grant dollars, great, and if we don't, then we regroup a little bit. But you guys have a lot of need, but a lot of need actually is good for grant dollars. So what that looks like, kind of adding to the map, would be the yellow was the projects that have been completed to date. So more work at the treatment plant. As part of the study of the evaluation for the sewer projects that are out there, the green area is kind of where that sewer planning is going. I didn't mention the trunks, one of the mains, which is this blue line. It's basically the trunk main, which is essentially the largest main in town that collects everything. As part of the requirements, we're investigating it. I don't expect it to be massive projects. I expect there to be some repairs and whatnot coming out of it, because it should be in relatively good shape. So it's not included in that previous estimate, but we're providing evaluation for it. I didn't include all the pump stations on here, but they're scattered throughout town, particularly in the south, in some of the lower lying areas. So I think, that was kind of the map of questions. So does anybody have any questions particularly on the kind of projects we're working on and developing, before I get to some of the costs? So, you have anything?
No,
Okay. So we put down, worked on trying to put together kind of a forecast for what sewer user rates would look like. I want to stress that this is just a projection. There's not you can't, please don't take any of the numbers as exact. Obviously we have the existing history of the last 10 years or so, but as we're projecting out in the future, there's a lot of variables that go in this, and trying to get it on one graph that I can show clearly to everybody was challenging, and I wanted to kind of show the overall kind of thought process behind this. So what I try to show here is there's basically two components to the debt or the cost you pay for sewer. One is the general operation and maintenance, the Derek and the guys down at the plant, trucks, electrical, all that, and the other component is debt, so loans that are played on the project. So the biggest light blue bars that are here is that O&M cost. So what I did here, this is the 30-year outlook, so this is going out to 2055. I basically put 2% inflation on it. That seems to be fairly accurate based on the last 10 years, but obviously that varies with everything in the world. And so that O&M cost and inflation is the largest driver of cost increase over a long period of time. So, it shows that kind of inflation over the next 30 years. But then the various colors on top are the loans that would be added for various projects. So, the orangish color is the projects that were completed about 10 years ago. So there's still about 20 years of loan payments on those. And then the gray bar is basically the current project. And then the yellow and blue would be those future projects if we moved forward with them. So it's not a perfect representation. Some of the costs in the loans are actually covered in some of your O&M, because there's some things that are paid out of different budgets and things. So it's not a perfect verbatim number, but it gives you kind of the idea of, costs go up just like everything else. Inflation is a factor in everything. And as we add projects, we add loans, and eventually they do come away and they offset some other costs. And the green line is basically inflation. I try to show the value of $1, what it is today versus what it'll be in 30 years. So obviously it follows the same trend as inflation, but it's put 2% inflation on it. But it does show that kind of always steady upward cost of increase of costs. So the overall kind of theme was just to show kind of how the costs are developed. There's obviously a lot goes into the whole budgeting process, which how we pay as well and everything. Not every sewer district pays the same amount, because there's a lot of nuances to that. But kind of the general overall kind of concept. So that's pretty much my presentation. So I wanted to kind of keep a high level for now. I can certainly answer more questions or go into any more detail you want.
Does anyone have any other questions on what Greg has presented? would, I know when you're looking at this, and obviously, like everything else, costs go up, that the committee, the Water Sewer Committee, for the last several years has been diligently working at trying to plan, as you can see in the presentation of future projects, trying to understand what projects are still needed for our system to run properly, to develop or to collect stormwater, to collect sewer, and not create any additional environmental hazards, not only for our but also for the workers who are doing the work in the plants. And at the same time, on the financial side, we've been really trying to hone in on understanding where we have opportunities for savings. So we actually just retired some debt last year, which is a good thing, as we're looking to be able to take on some new debt with this new project that's going on. And really working on our asset managements. So there's been, these systems are decades old, and just like a home, just like a car, needs certain types of repair and maintenance over time. And what we're trying to do is to understand what that cycle is, understand how much money we need to put away for those improvements, and that way we can try to make that slope as steady as possible as far as the impact to the sewer user. So there's a lot here. I know a lot to digest. That's why we try to keep it very high level for everyone. But a lot of work is trying to go in to see how do we balance what the system needs to function properly and not create any environmental or health concerns for our community, but at the same time balancing the burden that's being put on the sewer user, given the fact that a lot of these projects now that haven't been done in the past are needing to be done, otherwise our system can't function properly. So it is a kind of a delicate step. The board is very conscientious of trying to balance, again, the ability for the public to be able to pay for these, but also the need to be able to provide a reliable system to do, in this case, the collection of sewer and the separation of stormwater, but also move on to the next one to deliver, healthy quality water to our residents. Any other questions, any other thoughts? Anything that, no? Okay. We'll move on to water.
I guess the only other comment that I'd like to make is keep in mind that even though these are big and expensive projects, they are long overdue, and with the upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant and separating the stormwater so that we don't have to treat that allows for some growth as I got around, because without the treatment plant was basically at capacity, right? So you couldn't really add, people, somebody that wanted to build a new house or bring in a business or things like that, right? So we really had to do this in order to decrease the amount of product, I guess, if you will, going through the treatment plant so that we could allow for some growth in the community, because there wasn't any before. We were at capacity. So a lot of this stuff was mandated by the state, as he said, for some phosphorus reduction, things like that, and a reduction of trying to treat stormwater. But without doing some of this infrastructure work, the capacity in the town was at capacity. And so it's important to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that if you're going to have some growth in the community and bring in some new businesses and things like that, you've got to have the ability with the infrastructure of town to support that. So we just think that's important for everybody to understand that some of these numbers are big and expensive, but they haven't been done for years, right? And now we're kind of faced with an infrastructure that needs to be done. We fully believe that going forward, hopefully there's going to be some money coming down from the feds, right? That's going to allow us to do some more and bigger projects, hopefully, and be able to increase our infrastructure going forward even more. But I think it's just important to keep that with the sewer piece of the project in mind.
Question. How does storm and wastewater overwhelming the treatment plant impact the town in terms of violations and fines?
Well, I think Greg can answer that better than I can, but we are allowed so many overflows. We have certain places around town that do overflow. If there's a rain event and the plant can't get it all through the plant, then certain places in town will overflow, will discharge, because it's basically a backup, right? You can only squeeze so much through a certain size. And we're allowed so much by what they call a speedies permit, can't tell you what the acronym stands for, but we're allowed so many discharges a year, and if we exceed that, then we get fined. And so that's really the thing. So removing the stormwater and treating it separately, as nature intended, then we don't have to run that through the plant. And obviously, we know that we can look at the mountains surrounding us, and we can imagine the amount of stormwater that comes off, you know, some of these mountains and drains into the streams, and we have to run that all through our treatment. And it costs money to treat that water too, so you know, it should reduce some of those expenses on maintaining the plant going forward as well.
Also to the projects that were completed, basically through including the portage, were set in motion in that 10-year range, 10 to 15-year range. I think, I wasn't here for all of that, but I know the town was definitely in violation with the DEC. And doing the two big projects, the treatment plant, and kicking off some of the separation projects, got us back in compliance with DEC. So if those hadn't been done, there would have been steep fines and things. So that's kept it from happening. The biggest needs have been taken care of, but the next phases are required to keep it moving. So there's some flexibility in time on some of those. The collection system project has some flexibility in time. So if great grant dollars come through, you're required to do it. So it's good to do it. It's good if we keep it in planning. You're actually required to plan it. One of the required items is to provide a plan, which is why we're executing that now with the grant that we received last year. The phosphorus limit is required. I believe it's due in 2 years. It needs to be in compliance with that in 2 years. That's close, but the project will make sure it's in compliance. So there's as with everything with regulations, there's always new coming, and there's been keeping on. So you guys are in pretty good shape with DEC. I think they know you guys are doing a good job. But we do need to keep at least the plans going, because that's what keeps the state happy with everybody. So, anything else on sewer before I jump into water? So a similar presentation for water. Again, obviously, just saying the same thing over again. I know we've done a lot of projects in the last few years. But there are, just like sewer, there's more that needs to be done. There are new mandates, and there's a lot of old infrastructure that needs to be worked on. Water and sewer funding are very different. As I'll show you in a minute, the water funding was very successful for this last project. It's going to be harder going forward. Sewer, there's generally more funding available, so that it's similar going forward. Unless we see different money coming in from the federal government. So again, similar presentation to the sewer. And as with anything dealing with the government, there's about 9 million acronyms to learn. I don't expect everybody to learn them all, but please ask me if you want me to go into any of them. So the majority of the projects completed to date have to do with the new well system. I'm sure everybody's heard a lot of the stories and whatnot, but the Gooseneck Pond source that fed down here, the majority of the town down here, was required by the federal government to be changed. It does not meet current standards. It was one of two in the state that had a waiver, and that expired. Plus the open Chilliston Reservoir did not meet state standards, and the infrastructure is just old and aged and required a lot of money to replace it. So I've worked on that project basically my entire career, and one of the first projects I started working on. And it took a long time to develop into a project that we could get funded and build, because it's a complicated project, it's expensive, and obviously people are very passionate about it. But it was a requirement. And so the well source, so we did quite a few projects to complete that well source and the water mains that it took to get there. Get the water from the well to the tank and back into town. We actually were able to secure a lot of money from FEMA due to Hurricane Irene. Hurricane Irene actually damaged quite a bit of infrastructure, and we were able to replace it using money from FEMA and fix old pipes that need to be fixed anyway, and we were able to do so. So there's basically two kind of batches of project. There was the water main coming down from the Chilson tank, which is by the Rod and Gun Club, down into town. FEMA paid for that basically in its entirety. And then as we probably realized, we built a new well building up on Street Road, we put a new tank in, and we basically completed the water main connection in between. So there was a few grants that have played for the water main. There was actually more money from FEMA. There was money from OCR, again, Office of Community Rural, which is HUD. And then there was grant money from EFC, which is the main funding agency in the state. So that, including all of the water mains, the well building, and the tank, was just under 14 million. And we were able to secure a little over 4 million in grant for that, which is difficult to do with a water project. Water projects, they don't have as much money available as sewer projects do. So that was a pretty good, I know it's still a big number to pay back, I know it's still a big loan, these are all big dollars, but the amount of grant we were able to get for that project was a lot. And it took a lot of work to do so, it took a lot of planning, and we were able to get it there. So so with everything that's been done, that is the majority of the work that's been done on the water system. There's a few other smaller water projects that are actually paid for out of FEMA. There are a couple of the pressure reducing vaults out there. So we're able to get a lot done. But essentially it's the corridor from Street Road up to Chilson is where most of the work has occurred. We've also replaced the water main on the Portage. That's actually paid for out of the sewer project. But that was included, and that is actually one piece of kind of future planning that was completed. So, so that basically is kind of the existing projects of the last 10 to 15 years.
Do you want to just speak a little bit about, there were a lot of different options that were looked at when the water project was going through, and this is a great picture just to be able to see kind of the topography in the area. And you just kind of, many people may or may not be familiar, obviously Lake George, we have the Lake George filter plant over here, which provides about 500,000 gallons of water to the community since it came online. And then we have Gooseneck Pond up over here, which has several miles that leads eventually to the Chilson Reservoir. And that particular system was put in back in the 30s and was at one point estimated to provide over 1 million gallons worth of water. It was supposed to be connected to Rock Pond. That connection was never made. And so many years have passed, and Gooseneck and Lake George were the main supplies for the town. Gooseneck right now, and in the last decade or so, has really provided about a fraction of what it was intended to. Right now it's about 300,000 gallons that's flowing through there. And like as I said before, Lake George actually, they tried to increase its capacity up to 600,000 to try to balance what the needs were for the town. So you can do the math, 300,000 and 600,000 a day, gallons a day, is just still under 1 million gallons. Our area is needing about 1.5 million gallons is what the estimate. And for some of the comments that Mr. Cunningham had made as well, in terms of being able to handle the needs today, especially in the summertime when our town has a lot of visitors and a lot of other activities going on, and into the future, capacity is something that really needed to be addressed. As Greg had mentioned also, the treatment standards, we were given filtration avoidance back in the 90s, and we hadn't really complied with it, and the state was forcing that particular treatment process to be met, because we can't, just like you read about articles in the paper in various parts of the United States, we don't want to be one of those towns that is providing unhealthy water, so to speak, to our constituents. So that is an important thing. So they help by meeting the treatment standards, the capacity, and then the third thing is the affordability. And as I'm sure many of you followed over the course of the last decade or so, there's been many iterations trying to find what solutions would meet those three criteria, the capacity, the treatment standards, and affordability. And so we've tried to look at upgrades to the Lake George filter plant. We've looked at upgrades to the Gooseneck Pond. Those particular upgrades, different variations of them, were well over $20 million. In fact, one of the ones, most, promising ones that would have met all the check marks, or close to meeting all the check marks, would have been nearly $34 million. $34 million in comparison with what we chose here, what the town had moved forward with based on all the engineering research that had been done. It's nearly a third of the cost, or definitely less than half the cost. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about the move to the new supply, and in one of the projects we're going to share in here is, obviously we met capacity, we met treatment standards, and we met affordability, so that's 3 good things we met. But obviously hardness is one of the things that comes with choosing a site that is not what everyone else has had, it has been experiencing over the last, number of decades with soft water from the 2 surface water links that we have. So I just wanted to kind of share that because I think that's important to understand some of what we're going to be sharing here in terms of projects that we've completed and next steps moving forward.
So, if anybody has any questions, let me know. We can dive into anything more you like, but I'll move on to some of the proposed projects. So, again, these projects are focused on the Hamlet, former village area, not Chilson Eagle Lake. The reason being is that is separate. The separate number of users and the funding is different, so I was trying to focus on the other projects and certainly answer questions on that. But these are for kind of the main districts down here and view what's required and what may be needed. So one of the mandates that's out there from the state is that we install water meters. It stems from the upgrades to the water system. It is something that has to be done. It actually comes from the sewer side of things, and both DEC side of things actually comes from DEC. Water conservation, but also reduction of water usage at the wastewater treatment plant, which actually ends up going back to capacity and basically buying back capacity there. So those are required to be completed by 2025. Right now, we've got a grant application out for about $2 million, which is about half of the cost. That would involve water meters at every residence, and basically the one piece that is required from the state. The next two are good at basically the next phases of replacing aged infrastructure. So in the town, there are 2 water storage tanks. There's a new one we put up on Chilson Hill, and then there's one on off of Abercrombie Street on about Defiance. That tank is a steel tank from the 60s. It's pretty well rusted. It's well past its useful life. It is a critical component of the system in keeping water for the southern half of town. That tank does need to be replaced. It needs replaced fairly soon. It's anything that's aged, infrastructure may last for another 10 years, it may not. So we've got it on the plans for the next project to be replaced. Essentially be replaced in kind, probably with a different style of tank that'll last a bit longer, but other than that, replaced in kind. And then the next big one, and this is the one that will require more planning and probably some public input over the next couple of years, is replacing water mains through town. So there are essentially 2 systems in town. There's the well system and there's Lake George. The systems actually operate a bit independently of each other just based on the way the plumbing of the system is. And we need to work to upgrade the plumbing of the system to integrate those systems better. So there's a couple of different options. We'll work through some different options. Water main replacements down from the north to the south. There may be some water main replacements in town. All that kind of depends on where grant dollars go and that sort of thing. But one of the long-term goals with it is to eventually mothball the Lake George plant. It's nice to have a second source. It's nice to have another source out there, but that plant is also 25 years old. It's not a great plant to operate even on optimal days. And it actually costs quite a bit of money to replace. The cost of operating that plant over the next 30 years, even if we didn't replace it or upgrade it, is about the same as the loan on that $4 million project. So essentially, by replacing that water main, we can mothball that plant and essentially save money. It's not 1 for 1 exactly, but it's pretty close. And that doesn't include the fact that plant won't last another 30 or 40 years. It'll have to be upgraded. That was all reviewed in the previous project, but upgrading that plant is not easy. It's actually built on fill in Lake George. We're not going to do that again. We're not expanding that property down there. The permits and things would just never happen. So the plant technology would have to change dramatically, and that would be very expensive. More money than spending on the water mains, which already need to be replaced anyway. So none of that's set in stone, but that's kind of the thought process. Obviously, everybody will have a lot of input on that. And there's different options out there, but that's kind of the general game plan for now, and depending on where grant dollars go and where money comes from. But it is something that has to be worked on. The whole infrastructure is 100 years old, and it's in rough shape. And we need to keep picking away at it as best we can. And then the other piece is water softening. Obviously, the new water well source has hard water. Hard water is not a regulated part of the water. It is not something the state regulates, so that water meets all regulations on everything. The only real downside of that water is it's hard. And as much as that it is a personal preference type thing, obviously if you don't like it, you don't like it, and I totally get that. So we've been looking at some options to deal with it. Hard water can be dealt on the local level, you can throw a water softener in your house. Or the town can pursue a municipal water softening system. We've completed reports and evaluations and options there. It is something that is certainly viable to do, but it is not something that is going to get grant dollars. So it would be a system that's put in. It's estimated about $3 million, and we usually try to estimate high when we're doing municipal, doing planning for projects, but it's going to be in that neighborhood. They're big buildings, they're big equipment, and more importantly is the operations. We didn't put another bit to that at this particular presentation. We wanted to just kind of start the process of talking about it, because we're working on putting together the various options to kind of give the public kind of the plus and minuses. But the high level of it is, from a cost standpoint, they're pretty similar actually over a period of time. So if you put a water softening system in your house now, you're going to pay for it up front. You'll pay for the maintenance over time. If the town puts it in, the actual dollars that are spent over the 20 or 30 years of the lifespan of it actually add up to be about the same. However, you're paying for it smaller increments every year, and the town is doing the maintenance. But town maintenance costs always go up, and go up at a larger scale for a town. So it can be done. There's benefits. The benefits to the homeowner are about the same, because the benefits are really in your house. They're at your hot water heater or a commercial entity. There's not really a lot of benefit to the town system by itself. Hard water is actually almost as easy around the town system than soft water is. So that's just something the town has to decide. If that's what everybody wants and they want a municipal water system, hard water softening system, it can be done. There's a lot of other infrastructure to fix out there that if, one water mains break, that leaves you without water. If the Baldwin filter plant goes down, it leaves half the town without water. So those are, when we're thinking about how much money we want to spend, we need to consider those priorities. Even though hard water may be the thing that everybody wants to deal with immediately, those other critical items are still out there. So our game plan was to kind of start a conversation now, and we can have more conversations on which way we want to go with some of these projects. These are really high-level planning. The water meters are due. We're applying for those. We applied for the grant. If we get the grant, we'll start pursuing it. If not, we'll keep working on it. The rest of them are in those early planning stages, because we want to keep, with all the grant dollars, take many years to pull all this together. If infrastructure money comes from federal government, we want to be able to go apply for it and get it. If not, then we'll work on it until we can come up with a good game plan that's affordable and manageable. But at least we get them in the process, because it takes so long to pull that together. So it's kind of the roughly quick and dirty of that. So on the same map with the proposed, the water main replacement is the only one that you can probably really see. There's a couple of options through town, kind of either going down Wicker Street, Montcalm, or kind of down through the middle there. Those aren't the only options out there. We'll be working on different ones. It depends on kind of the modeling of the system and making sure we get all the piping connections correct, but that's kind of where we stand at this point. And then Baldwin filter plants down here. The Defiance tank, I always call it the Defiance tank. Actually, the town calls it the Abercrombie tank, so they're one and the same tank. Abercrombie Street, and then water meters are obviously across the entire system. So that's kind of my high level. On that. And then again, try to do a similar thing with the costs. Again, it's not an exact dollar amount. It was meant to more so show kind of the relative effect of it. Again, the blue is your operations and maintenance. The reason why it kind of changes in here, and this is kind of where some of the complication of it comes, but also kind of the good planning that Joe's been doing and the town has been doing, is trying to start paying for some of those dollars that have been spent ahead of time, so it's not as big of a shock, and trying to outline. So because of the way that everything is billed, the numbers kind of blend right, and this is basically today, right in here. So I translated it from your current bill to where orange became debt, but a lot of that number is actually already in the bill today. So, again, if this is, the orange is kind of the current project, and then the other colors are some of those other projects if they were to come in. And that's without a lot of grant dollars. When I showed you sewer, I was showing you the grant dollars as I'm anticipating getting, because we wouldn't move forward with them if we didn't get those grant dollars as much as possible. With water, there's not a lot of grant dollars to project right now, so if we can get them, those numbers would come down. If not, then we'll work about the best plan we can get with them. So again, it's meant to be kind of a relative, kind of show you where things go. And granted, and keep in mind, you know, this is out 30 years, so with inflation, a lot of those numbers aren't that much worse than they are today. They're just a bigger dollar amount, but they're just coming from inflation. But your debt actually stays the same. You know, once you make a debt payment, loan payment, you pay the same amount you do for the rest of the time. There's a little bit of inflation to it with the way it's structured, but for the most part, it doesn't go with inflation. So.
And I think that's because we've been so successful in getting 0% pressure.
Yeah. So that's what I've got for water, and I'm just going to try to keep it at a high level, kind of just starting the conversation today. There's a lot further to go on this. Water, probably there's a lot more planning to put into water than there is sewer. Sewer grant funding there's just more available, so it's a little bit easier to actually pull it together. Some of those projects with the town board are making some decisions on in the near future to basically be applying for those grants, doing all the initial paperwork it takes to go after them. Water we're probably a couple of years away from really locking some of these in, unless federal grant dollars come about. But we're ready to go after those if they come. So.
Any questions?
Yeah, when's the water gonna be suitable for human consumption? I can't drink it. If I go have coffee at the Burley House, or McDonald's, or Maplefield, Hot Biscuit, anywhere, it's a guaranteed trip to the ER for me. Severe vomiting. Plus the expense of buying water, because if I can't drink it, I sure as hell ain't gonna feed it to my dog. I can't cope with it, so when's it gonna be suitable?
It is suitable right now.
Not for me, it isn't. It's a guaranteed trip to the ER for severe vomiting. I've had my gallbladder removed. Oh, yeah, the hard water creates gallstones. That's gone. That's not the problem anymore. I go to E-Town and Crown Point, I go right to Stewart's, no problem. I come here, and I'm guaranteed sick, vomiting, before the sun goes down. That's not suitable for human consumption. I can't cope with it.
The water that's coming out of the street road wells,
I live at Motor Circle.
the water that's coming out of the street road wells, coming into the town, is the same water, the exact same water that Crown Point has been on for
I've had
decades.
one cup of coffee in Crown Point, most of it's E-Town, believe it or not.
I can't speak for E-Town, but the water it's the same underground aquifer,
And
and
everybody
Crown
has
Point has
water.
got the exact same water for years. And as far as the testing that Ticonderoga does on the water, it meets every federal and state requirements for drinking water. And that's just a fact. I can't talk to your personal problems and issues that the water has an effect on you.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the fact is that the water that's being generated out of the wells meets every state and federal requirements.
What about the gooseneck?
The gooseneck water, at this point in time, as you know, been getting letters for, I don't know how many years because of the cryptosporin that's in there because it can't be properly treated.
We get a letter every 3 months.
Every 3 months you get a letter,
And we pay full price for our water.
and that's why we're trying to come up with a solution
The solution is, why are you charging us for water we can't drink?
Well, you can drink it. You
Yeah,
can
but
drink
why-
it.
Then why are you sending me a letter?
Okay, we're gonna, the Chilson Eagle Lake system is a different system than what we're talking about here, so that's one of those questions. You had a question in the back?
Yes, I know you've got a big expense on the old plant on Lake George, but losing that as a source of water, even if it's a backup, we will probably never get it back again. It doesn't have to be treated to be softened because it's already soft water. I'm wondering if the expense of just having it as a backup, not putting all your eggs in one basket in Street Road, this has a backup, and it also takes care of the southern end of the town pretty well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know there'd be a big expense to replace the plant that's already there, but I think it'd be money well spent.
It comes at, all that we worked in, we can certainly go through more detail, you know, because none of the decisions have been made, they're all preliminary plans. Those are all options, it just comes down to how much is affordable. The plant down there, I can't remember what it was a few years ago, but it's probably $3 or $4 million to upgrade it. It's the reality of it. The fact that part of the expense is the sewer system down there is inadequate for an upgraded plant, so the sewer system has to be replaced.
If you were to lose the ability to take water from Lake George, would you ever be able to get it back?
I can't fully answer that for you today, it's certainly something we have to run down with the state, but the way I look at it, and again, this is a town decision, if you guys want to, if the town decides they want to upgrade that plant, that can certainly be done. We can find a way, it's not going to be easy, down there's not a lot of options down there, just so you know, but the redundancy that's required from the state that the town has to have is met with Street Road. That has the redundancy needed. So the redundancy, having two different sources is not a requirement. It really ends up being a luxury. And it just comes down to how much cost the town wants to invest in it. Like I said, an easy number, it costs $100,000 a year to run that plant.
Which one?
The Bolton Road, Lake George plant. Again, that translates into about a loan payment of over $3 to $4 million construction project, which can be used to replace other failing infrastructure. If you were to replace that plant, you have the cost of the $3 or $4 million project plus the cost to operate it. So it all factors into the bill that's paid. If the town wants those redundant sources, it's fine, but it's just the cost that has to be borne. To answer your question about just kind of quote unquote mothballing it, keeping it there, you really can't do that with the plant that's there.
I understand that.
Yeah, so it really is you have to run it or not. Now, we can't take it offline without doing some of these other upgrades, so some of those things that have to be weighed. So we had that conversation, the town had that conversation, the town board, previous supervisor had that conversation when the whole water project was developed over the years, so putting in the street road system and maintaining that was looked at, and it just comes down to cost. So
How many communities on the lake take their water from Lake George? Or do you know of other?
I don't know off the top of my head, there are a couple, but I'm not sure off the top of my head.
And their facilities are outdated as well, or not? I just.
I don't off the top of my head, because I don't work with any of those communities personally. I'm not sure if they are, just it happens to be that this one is outdated.
Well, I could just speak to one thing, the harmful algal blooms that has been happening all around, the haves, you've heard of those?
What?
The algal blooms, the harmful algal
Yeah.
blooms, right?
Yeah.
So one of the concerns about taking water from a surface lake is if that were to strike, then you would not be able to receive water from the lake, right? There was one, I believe, last year, the year before, but certainly that's been a concern that has been, is high on the list of the LGA and the fund, Lincoln Park Commission, for those types of incidents that may happen that would affect the drinking water supply for any community that's taking water, even if it's not a municipal source, even if it's an individual, taking it for their own needs, which does occur along Lake George. So.
I know it's been referred to as a completed project. What's the time frame for the Portage as far as completing it?
So
What's that?
Paving, reconstruction, sidewalks, that whole bit?
It's going on right now.
Oh, yeah, but
Yeah.
what's the time frame?
the majority of the paving will be done by the end of this year. They're full on in, there's 5 crews working right now. The goal is to be done and paved out before winter comes. Obviously, we're getting very close to that happening. My gut feeling is there will be some left for next year, unless we get really lucky this fall. But in the next month and a half, which is, we have pretty much until Thanksgiving in order to pave, they will have the majority of it done. There will be restoration and grass and all that stuff to come back to in the spring, but the majority of the road itself will be done. So it should look a lot different a month from now. But I do realize there's a lot left to do, so that's being very optimistic. The realist in me says there'll probably be some work left in the spring, but they'll have a lot more done by the end of the year than there is right now.
Is there any plans, whenever you're done, will Father Jokes be cleaned up? The mud that's on Father Jokes?
Yeah, the entire thing.
Yeah, so they'll be doing good cleaning. If there's some cleaning that needs to happen now, I will remind them that that needs to be done. But it will be, as we get, what they're doing right now is the storm, all the water and sewer is in, they're working on storm, and they're following storm by putting the actual road sub-basin, and then we'll start actually paving. So as soon as the paving goes in, it'll be much easier to get things cleaned up as they go. So it won't be 100% done by the end of the year, but it'll look a lot better in about a month and a half.
Yeah, the plan was to have it done by the end of the year. When COVID hit last year, as you may recall, New York State had to put a hold on some of the grants. And we had been fortunate to receive that $5 million grant just a year before that. And so the concern was if we moved forward with this project and didn't get that grant, for whatever reason that the state decided, then we would be having to turn that into a loan in order to finish this project. So we had been very conscientious about this from the very beginning, that if we were lucky enough to get that money, that we would be able to do the entirety of that section. But if not, that we would kind of stage it. And so we basically halted the project for a couple months, waiting for New York State to give us the green light that that money was going to be still awarded to us. They weren't going to take it away from us. And so that is what kind of caused the delay this year in finishing it, which is why it's going to go into, some of the final pieces will be finished up. A lot of the restoration will be finished up in 2022. But for the most part, as you can see now, they're grading it. They're getting ready to start pouring the concrete for the sidewalks as well as the asphalt for the road. So in a few weeks, you'll start to see some changes taking place. I know it's right in front of your home, so you're kind of watching it every day. And pretty soon, you should see some improvement to what you've been seeing in the last several months.
One thing I'd like to add to the Baldwin Road discussion that people may or may not be aware of, but because Baldwin Road, Lake George, is what it is, we can't draw all the water out of Lake George if we would like to. Right? We're only allowed to take so much a day, which I think is
750,000 gallons?
750,000 gallons a day, right? So it cannot produce by permit enough water to supply the town. It can only supply a small part of the southern end of the town. So if you're looking at it as a backup, it's a backup for a small percentage. So it really isn't a backup and doesn't really provide, as you might think, a secondary source of water, because it physically cannot provide the town with all the water the town would need if something happened to the street road, for example, and it couldn't get water. Where street road, with the number of pumps we have, can supply the entire town and with plenty of water and plenty of surplus. So where Lake George and Baldwin Road cannot at this point. Even if the plant was put in large enough, you cannot get enough water by permit out of Lake George, because through the DEC and the Lake George Park Commission will not allow you to take that volume of water out of the lake to feed the whole town. So.
And actually, a good point, besides the permit, actually physically the water can't reach the upper end of town without a massive change, so everything's plumbed. So again, none of that has been decided. This was kind of the part to start thinking through some of those options. I realize that there's a lot of history with the Lake George system. A lot of people like having it. The water coming out of even Lake George requires a pretty high level of treatment to meet all of the standards. So there's a lot of infrastructure that has to go in to do that. So if that is a decision ultimately that is to keep it, it will require those upgrades to make that happen in the long run. If not, I realize that the hard water at Street Road is not something that everybody loves clearly, but it does meet all of the state standards. So it's kind of it's one of those things that has to be weighed by everybody. There's not a lot of towns out there that have more than one system. There's a few, but most of them do not. So it is a luxury, but as Tom pointed out, it really is not true redundant source. They're not one for one. So all that just has to be factored into the balance. If we had unlimited funds, yeah, I'd love to have both sources. It's great, but I'm sure we'll have similar conversations about how much the water sewer bill is, and we're trying to keep that as low as we possibly can, also meeting the needs. So we're trying to do some of this planning.
To provide water for the southern end of the town, is it the gravity flow from Chilton Hill going to be strong enough to take care of the southern end of town?
Yeah, right now,
Gooseneck's not, you're saying Gooseneck?
No, I'm saying that you pump from Street Road up Chilson Hill, and then it's gravity flow from there, isn't it?
Correct. Yes, the tank results in the pressure for the system. Yeah, so Lake George pumps in about Defiance, feeds the southern half of town. The well pumps into Chilson and feeds the northern half of town. If the Lake George system were eventually to go away, the Chilson tank would serve the southern half of town. The elevations are correct, so it does work. In fact, right now, the pressures are actually too high at Chilson. So it's not actually just an easy turn off Lake George. There actually is other infrastructure that needs to happen. That's where that whole, do we spend money on the Lake George system, or we spend money on the distribution system? Which one do you spend money on? Because one or the other has to happen over the next, period of time. But yes, the Chilson system, or the Street Road system, was designed to serve the entire town over a period of time, but if necessary. It has both the capacity, pumping, and the pressure needed. So, yeah.
It's hard to see from this and just been looking at the different projects, but I think the thing that's kind of important to, Tom had mentioned on it, Greg had mentioned on it, so, you have the Lake George filter plant, the capacity, the permit, the amount that the town can take in is about $750,000, but actually the property we own can't, as Greg had mentioned, can't sustain a larger plant to be able to bring in everything that we would want to have, because that was one of the things that was looked at originally, to see if actually being able to provide water from Lake George, because at that time it was a 2 million gallon permit for taking water in from Lake George. But when we put the wells on, the state doesn't give unlimited permitting for water, so you have to kind of trade one for the other. But Lake George filter plant would never be able to provide, the parcel that the town owns would never be able to provide a larger facility to bring in any more than what we currently have there. So I think that's one thing that's very important to understand. So the 500,000 gallons that it's sized for is really the max that we could ever really operate. The other point that I think is important, and Greg could share an anecdote about it, is the water that you provided from Lake George can really only pressurize half of the system, the quantity of the water that they have, and the way that the interconnected water mains are throughout town. So as we were putting in the water, as the contractor was putting in the water line up the Portage, we were having breaks taking place on streets like Highland Street. I mean, we had a series of breaks on those streets. The reason being, the new pipe going in, brand new, has no buildup, if you will, in the inside, because these pipes, they run for many, many years. They start to have, like anything else, they start to, fill with tuberculation or other types of natural growth in the inside. So when they replaced that pipe, all of a sudden now the pressure was able to jump about 10 psi.
Yeah.
And that was enough for the other aging infrastructure along those streets to now not be able to handle the pressure, and then they were breaking. So then our water and sewer guys were out there trying to fix that, working with the highway department, trying to, kind of break open the road, get to the leaks, figure out where the leaks were, and then, clamp them and repair them, and then repave the road. So the system itself is, as we mentioned, it's aging. It's needing to be replaced all throughout town. So simply trying to solve it through here still requires a lot of infrastructure improvement throughout town to make something like that work. If it could happen, if we could provide the capacity at that one side. So it probably would be good at some point to probably give like a history of how water, and sewer kind of evolved over time. But you have Gooseneck, which goes back to the 30s, and Lake George, which I'm trying to think is in the 70s or.
The current filter plant's from the 90s.
Those plants in the 90s, but it was
Sources earlier.
sources earlier than that. So, but the way the system was designed, it was pressurized from both sides, right? And so what we're doing now that the capacity can be met, all the requirements can be met by the well field and the wells on Street Road, is to try to find another way to pressurize the backside of the system and from the front side of the system, so as not to cause other breaks in the system in the process of trying to replace those. Because obviously we don't have an unlimited source of money. We're trying to be very prudent about how we move forward, being mindful to how that affects the user rates, but also be mindful of the fact that we have to do something. No different than trying to take care of your car. You can't skip on doing oil changes or major maintenance on your car. Otherwise, eventually your car's not going to run. So it's the same kind of thing here. It needs to be constantly upgraded. There's different areas that need to be constantly maintained, and this is one of those areas that we're looking at, one of those projects with the bypass, to try to provide that pressure on the southern side of a system, matched by the northern side, which kind of feeds in right through Four Corners, right there at the McDonald's and Walgreens intersection, so that that system can handle the appropriate pressures in time. Otherwise, we'll have other situations like what we're experiencing Highland Street by replacing infrastructure. So I don't know if that helps to give more of a physical feel for this. It's not purely just, well, the town decided to do this for just because it wanted to. There's a lot of factors that are in play here, from the pressure, from the capacity, from the water treatment standards, and just the, you know, the complexity of the system. The system goes back many decades, so trying to figure all these pieces out and how best to, you know, to ensure that it continues to operate for everyone and not have hiccups along the way it's a big undertaking. So, any other questions? Yeah.
You built a tank halfway up Chilton,
Yes.
a huge tank. You pump from Street Road into that?
So Street Roads, Greg can explain it, but basically Street Road pumps the water to the town as the need is there. And every evening it's basically making sure that tank, you know, is filled to a certain level so that when it shuts off, there's enough water in there to pressurize the system and allow gravity to take place. But at all points in time, either the tank itself is filled to a certain level, providing the gravity pressure, right? Pressure from being up on the hill, or the pumps are operating, providing that same pressure, charging the system, so when you turn your faucet on, you've got water to come out at the pressure that is coming out in your home. So yeah, you kind of need the two, otherwise the tank would have to, the wells would have to run constantly to keep the system
Why
charged.
couldn't the lines run from Gooseneck into that tank and you treat the water out of that tank?
I'm sorry.
Why couldn't you put water in that big tank, because the reservoir was just above there, and treat the water that came out of that tank instead of building that monstrosity up in Street Road, that you can't use the water? It spoils just about every faucet in my house so far with that hard water. What do you do?
Well, so the first thing, you know, the cost of the filter plant was, again, these are all things that were looked at before. Filter plant cost, that's a pretty large cost. But going back to what I mentioned earlier, Gooseneck doesn't provide enough capacity. Gooseneck is only providing 300,000 gallons
Didn't provide what?
capacity.
Well, that could be changed.
Don't think so, given all the other infrastructure. There's a
And it
poster,
runs down
there's
here.
a poster over here. When you're done, you can take a look, and it'll show you all the things that were proposed and the costs associated with them. So that had been looked at through the past administrations, trying to come up with something. You know, when it comes to affordability, you know, the New York State evaluates what it feels to be affordable, and when that proposal came through at $32 or $34 million, they said, listen, this is not affordable to the public, so we cannot, you know, agree to a project like this.
What's this water plant going to cost us in the end with all the hard water and every appliance in the house going bad because of excelsior?
You're gonna have to buy water stuff.
Yeah, that's the solution to the water.
And
If that's something that you want to, you'd have to purchase a water softener, or like we had on here. You know, the one other discussion was, you know, whether this is something that the public wants the town to pursue in
I
terms of
can't
putting.
see that.
So this is a water softening system. Basically, it would be $3 million. But because it's an aesthetic feature, there is no grant funding for it. It'd be something that would be purely paid, you know, by the water users.
What does New York City do with their water that comes out of these open reservoirs above New York? What do they do with their water?
They are,
They have their own requirements. In fact, actually, the requirement to replace Gooseneck Pond is similar.
Not like we do here.
It's actually similar. to-
Ours is different because we're in the Adirondacks.
Yours is different because it's a different type of system, but you actually have similar requirements in New York City. They're still, I'm sure they're still under mandate to fix things, but all that stuff takes time, regardless of the impact between the city and upstate. Obviously, there's differences there, but we have to, when we're working on tie, we have to work with what the state is requiring tie to do. So, you know, all of these things that everybody's mentioned today on all the water systems were all explored as part of those conversations. There's there's many different options, there are many different options explored, and the town selected the ones that balanced grant funds, requirements, needs, everything, and unfortunately, we can't fix, unfortunately, there are some things that are not what everybody wants, but you have to balance the requirements coming from the state and the federal government too first. Unfortunately, that's the way things work.
If you were to compare Gooseneck and Lake George softness to Street Road, what are the numbers there?
Both Lake George and Gooseneck are very soft, and the Street Road is very hard. It is true. I mean, it's very hard. The numbers are like 3 and 190, something like that. I mean, that's the case, but don't keep in mind, hardness is not regulated. All of the things that are in Gooseneck and Lake George that have to be treated are regulated. The Street Road project meets all the other water requirements. I'm not trying to dismiss the hard water. I get that it's an impact, I get it's a difference. I've lived in a house that had hard water, we put a softener, and I know the differences personally, but the hard water is a very common thing. I mean, most communities, not most, but many communities have hard water. There's many communities up the lake that have hard water. Crown Point's hard water is very similar to yours. It's the difference between the two that's noticeable, and I understand it's noticeable, but it is an aesthetic thing. It is not a required. Water is not required to be soft or hard. In fact, in a lot of ways, soft water can be just as bad as hard water, especially on the system and various reasons. So, it is something that's there. It's something that we can work to deal with, but we had to find a water source that met requirements, and that one does. So it can't, unfortunately. It'd be nice if we could find perfect water. I wish we could have found you perfect water. We came close, but the hard water is something that's there and we'll have to deal with.
Could you just, on your map, give me an idea of what portion of the town is being serviced presently by wells and what portion is still on Lake George?
So I can give you a kind of rough idea.
There's two systems, correct?
Yeah.
So where they divide?
Yeah. So it is physically one system. Everything is connected. The two comes from some valving and things, but also from just kind of the way the hydraulics work. So just for clarity, but it's roughly the southern part of town. So exactly where everything connects in depends on elevations and a lot of things, but it's essentially the southern part of town is on Lake George, and the northern part of the Hamlet area, and then everything up Street Road and this way is on wells.
Just so you understand, it's not two completely separate systems. So the water at certain places in town does mix, if you will.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a mix between, so it's not like a delineation or a valve so that.
Is that dependent on, like, for instance, the tank up on Defiance being maybe just filled from Lake George versus filled from both places?
Well, right now it's filled from Lake George,
Yes.
right? That tank,
So
right?
whoever's getting fed out of that tank will just get Lake George.
Well, until they get to a point where the water coming from the other side and the two of them meet.
The pressure gets higher in the other one?
Well, there's a point where they co-join, I guess, if you will, in the pipes, right? Because it's a kind of a circular system, so it's not a delineation.
Oh, you're talking to the delivery pipes?
Right, both of them are delivering water from point A and point B to the same central location.
Gotcha.
So there is a point where they meet, and it's going to be a mix of that water, as opposed to a definitive delineation, right? It's like brackish water, right? If you're at the seawater and you got stuff, there's a point where they kind of mix, and one's salt water and one's fresh water, and there's brackish in the middle, so.
And depending on pressures, it could probably be different.
It could change from day to day depending on pressures, that's right.
Yeah, the physics of it is kind of a combination of the elevation of the house essentially relative to the surroundings and the pipe size and condition. So it varies a little bit. I mean, there's definitely distinct areas that are separate, and then in the middle of town, it varies a bit. And it'll vary over time as upgrades and things are made in the system as well. So yeah, a lot of it comes down to the age and condition of the piping that's out there right now.
Won't that piping eventually need to be replaced anyway? So if that is I guess when you're looking at everything, I personally, if you're in my own home, I wouldn't make a major decision based on the fact that I'm going to have to replace this pipe. If the pipe is already old enough, then I'm going to have to replace it down the road anyways. You follow what I'm saying? So
Yeah, and that's
just all those things are things to consider.
Yes.
yeah. So as we develop let's say we move forward with their plan to replace some of the piping to correct some of those issues. We would work towards, in the water system, we try to find kind of backbone piping, larger piping that kind of feeds the biggest areas, and kind of marry that with the worst pipes that we know are out there, and try to kill two birds with one stone. One option is to just run a brand new pipe kind of around the edge of town and connect in. That would correct some of the pressure issues that are out there, but then we'd be putting a new pipe in without fixing any other problems. So we went through some of the iterations, and we started looking at where some of the worst older pipes are. So we'd like to replace those at the same time, so kind of, like, basically what you're saying, you don't want to just put in new pipe, want to replace old pipe too. So it's a complicated, there's actually a lot that goes into kind of figuring out the best plan of action through there, because of how old everything is in the infrastructure and the mixing and all of that, it all goes into it. So there's a lot behind kind of drawing these two lines here, which we are diligently working on.
What about the infrastructure of the really heavy water usage places like International, the hospital, schools, even the fire department with their trucks and everything? I mean, what kind of an impact is this going to have on them? Are they going to have to treat it, or depend on you people to treat the hardness?
Each hardness impacts every user differently, including industrial. So the biggest impact of hardness generally come from hot water, because the hardness essentially comes out of the water as it's heated. So the entities that use more hot water tend to be the more impacted ones. A lot of the commercial entities, or some of them I know have put water softeners in already. For fire trucks and things, that's, generally speaking, not as much of a problem as using cold water. I mean, there's certainly always impacts, but so it really does come down to the individual use of the system. For a school, for instance, it'd be more in the kitchens and laundry facilities, that sort of thing, not necessarily the entire school. So if a water softening system went in, it would obviously impact everybody, generally equally. But if individual systems go in, then they can be put in really where they're at needed and as needed. And there's not a right answer or a wrong answer. They're both valid, just depending on which direction the town wants to go versus individuals.
Any other questions? Yes.
Wasn't the hardness when you were testing your core samples, when you were trying to get your wells, you could tell how hard water is based on your core samples? Is it that you didn't go far enough for your wells, or you went too far for your wells?
Well, the water source is where the hardness is coming from, so it isn't necessarily how deep or shallow the wells were drilled.
But you'd be able to tell from your core sample.
Yes, and the hard
Was
water.
that checked?
Yep, yeah.
And
So typically.
so it was okay that it was hard water. At that point you said, we have water, we don't care, it's hard water.
We didn't say we didn't care, but we didn't, it was noted to the town as part of the decision-making process. But it is.
So they knew it was hard water.
Yeah, it was part of the
Okay.
system, it's part of the planning, but our water hardness, again, is not a regulated commodity, so we have to balance all of the different options that are out there, and it's weighed in, it's part of the factoring.
But you as an
thought
engineer
process.
know what the ramifications are as hard water, correct?
Yes, and I also know the ramifications.
And you
of
would
the state
relay that to
requirements.
the town that you work for, correct?
Yeah, but I also know the ramifications of all the state requirements and all the other requirements in the system, and all of it has to be factored in, and it was.
Anything else?
You had talked about the water tanks at Abercrombie. Now,
Where?
Cold Spring, basically, we call it Cold
Yeah, we
Spring.
call those
Yeah. We all
You're
have
showing
a name-
your age,
We all
Bob.
have a name for it. You're talking about possibly replacing that. Is it because of the metal integrity of the base of it? Because I know back when I was supervisor, we actually put an electronic system inside that kept the electrons from joining to form rust, whatever. I would think that inside of that thing would be sparkling clean. So are you talking about the metal integrity of the base, or why are you thinking about replacing that?
Painting.
Oh, painting, yes, I understand painting, but
Yeah, those are also valid options. Yes, so the protection system was installed. Those have to be replaced eventually too. They're expensive. So it's a balance between doing more maintenance on the tank and spending more on maintenance that'll have to occur multiple times over the lifespan of a new tank versus the cost of putting a new tank in now and having less maintenance over that period of time. So all that
That
can be weighed.
system's only 15 years old, it's inside. That's prohibiting gross accumulating inside. So I'm just trying to think of cost-saving measures in the future to replace that whole thing, and you've already got a system inside it. I think it's gonna be working beautiful. I know, I understand it probably has to be painted, but
Painting the tank is somewhere between a third and a half of the cost of replacing it. So it's, and I was around when some of that system went in as well. I mean, yes, that system is there. Actually, the tank is due to be inspected this year, so we'll have an idea of where it is. So it's, once we get some of those reports back, we'll know and see how much time we have left. That's why it's in the planning stages. If you want to have a tank that's good, ready to go with no worries, that, replacing it sooner rather than later is better. If it happens to fit into some of the grant packages that come out from the federal government, great, then we'll do it. If not, then we can look at some of those other options too. I mean, they're all on the table. I know, back in the previous part of the previous project, some of that was looked at, and just looking at that balance between how much you want to spend on maintenance versus just replacing and having less maintenance over time. And from a planning standpoint, looking at kind of the big home run items, we certainly, all those other options are on the table, and we would consider those as well, and still are. Again, we're getting the inspection report back this year, so we'll see where we stand and how this is working.
I'm sure you're gonna consider all the costs, because, you look down the future, you talk about infrastructure costs, and you're talking about water meter costs. It's almost gonna be prohibitive to live in Ticonderoga to pay your water bill. So I'm just trying to think of anything you can do to help save, users' money. I mean, it just, and going back to the question about the hardness, was it, if you were to poll the people in Ticonderoga as far as spending $3 million to put a water softener, I probably think that most people would say, yeah, let's spend the money, rather than have my faucets and hot water heaters and everything else going in some of the businesses. But I know it's hindsight, but that should have been considered, to be absolutely honest with you. I would like to see some kind of softener going in at the time, especially since you knew it was hard. And from what I saw on the scale, you said very high. Usually in science, we used to go 1 to 15. I think that was like a 13 or a 14 out of 15, so it was really hard. So, I mean, it just seemed like common sense would have said, we've got to do something with the water softeners.
Keep in mind, in the planning of the project, there's caps on how much money can be spent. And putting a softening system in doesn't fit within the limits of the project that's out there now from the state limits. So it couldn't have been put in at the time.
It could not?
No, it wouldn't have fit within all the loan and funding.
You couldn't have made other cuts?
Not keep the system to where it needs to be to meet the state mandates. So, and all the requirements and the functions of the system, so.
The state mandated 14 million.
Yeah.
No, it was the cap limit for being able to be eligible for grants and so forth and hardship. And so we were just up at that ceiling amount. So putting anything like that on top of it, even if that was considered at the time, would have put us over and then disqualified us like the other options that we had considered that were well over $14 million.
The other thing to keep in mind as part of the evaluation, I guess, is from water softening systems. An individual system for standard residents is somewhere around $2,000, right, to put it in.
2,500.
Okay, well, maybe. We've talked to some, we had just the other day brought in a couple of local contractors that's been installing systems, and they seem to think that they were about 2,000, maybe it's 2,500. Call it 2,500. So you can put that in, and that system in your house should last, if it's maintained, about 20 to 25 years is what they're suggesting of system lasts. Municipal system is somewhere between 20 and 30 years, depending on, obviously, how it's maintained and that kind of stuff. A municipal system will only bring softness down to about 0.5 from where we are now at, 0.12 or whatever it is. Where a home system will bring it down to almost 0, right? And So there's a lot of things to kind of consider about, the best way forward. Do you put in a municipal system where everybody pays for it over basically the same amount of money over a period of time? Because if you look at the cost now for, I don't know, what is there, 2,500 homes, give or take, I don't know what needed. It's going to be done, require that. Some homes may want softener, some may not. But if you put it in a municipal system, everybody's paying that as opposed to paying an individual system. So there's quite a bit to be kind of considered from a town level, right? Which is the best way to go forward, because once you put in a municipal system, you're paying for it for the maintenance and all that kind of stuff. And the stuff that's pulled out of that system has to go through your water treatment plant, right? It doesn't just disappear. So it has to be tied into your sewer system, and now it goes to the plant and has to be treated in your plant. So, anyways, there's a lot to be considered when you're talking about trying to treat hard water. And like I say, I think we can take a lesson from our neighbors in Crown Point that's been dealing with the same aquifer and basically the same water for a lot of years, and how they're dealing with it, right? And some people like it. I can tell you there's some people that have been on wells, right, for a long time, and wells, because they're coming out of the ground, have minerals in them. The water is hard. And they go put them someplace, and they travel someplace, and they get soft water. I don't like this water, it feels different. Showers are different, all this stuff is different. So exactly, it uses different soap, it feels different. So it's different, right? And but it's like I say, it's not regulated by the state. It is something that we need to address. It is very different from what people were getting in the past. We went from very soft water to very hard water, so it is a significant change. And we understand that, and we're trying to figure out the best way forward to fix that. And it's not an easy solution, because putting in a municipal system is expensive. Probably not going to get grant money for it, and you have to compare that to what it costs an individual if they put in their own system. So there's a lot to be considered.
Shouldn't you have already considered that prior to doing this project, if you knew it was already hard? And what the ramifications would have been to the residents?
The fact is, we were under mandate to supply properly treated water to the residents, and that's exactly what we've done. And
So
we're
you
under
took the
mandate to do that.
cheapest first, oh, look, I found the water. I didn't go, as your engineer stated, we knew it was hard, but you could tell the hardness of the water on a core sample. So you go, oh, this is the minimum standard. Well, look where you are now. Now you got hard water, and it's ruining all the residents' appliances.
Well, there is no minimum standard for hard water, and the fact is
I didn't say minimum standard, I'm saying minimum standard of meeting your mandates or your requirements.
Well, you have to be able to supply enough volume of water, and you have to, and there are places, and I think Greg can speak to this, there are other communities not too far distant from us that don't have a water supply, proper water supply. And there's people that think that we're lucky that we have the water supply that we have, because we can supply water to the entire community in Ticonderoga from a single source. It's hard, yes, but it meets all the other requirements, and there wasn't any other place to go. And there wasn't really any other place to go to get the water that we needed. If there was, it'd been great. If we could have stayed with Gooseneck, can't happen. It's going to get shut off in 2025.
It could have stayed with Gooseneck, but there was an agreement between the town board and the state. It wasn't a mandate. It was a consent decree, which is an agreement, a negotiated agreement that you agreed to that now the judge is enforcing. It wasn't a mandate. They said you need to fix that water source. You need to meet these standards. You keep saying it's a mandate that it has to be closed, and that is untrue.
Yeah, we've had these conversations too much, so we're not going to go down that path.
Well,
anymore.
it needs to be
No,
heard
no,
over and over,
Yeah, but
because
it doesn't-
it's
it
not a
doesn't, because I don't
mandate.
think you have all the facts Fully understood.
I have
And the
the
other-
consent
I know
decree.
you do.
I have definitions of a consent decree and a mandate.
Any other questions as far as what the presentation had to share?
When did you first know the hardness of the water? When you took samples? And when did you let the public know about the hardness? When
They
they
did.
turned on the faucet?
Yep.
There was a letter that was issued back. at the
On
time.
hardness?
Yeah, about the hardness of the water, when the wells again. But I think, obviously, we're at the point we're at now, but I think you have to go back and say, what brought us to this point, right? This is years, decades of not having taken care of the systems that we currently have in place. I mean, the filtration avoidance goes back to the 90s. But you can, again, there's some nice charts over here we can pull and we can show. We've got a few engineers who have also worked on understanding the system. That'll show you that maintenance has been deferred for decades and decades and decades. So it comes to a point where it's like something has to be done. You have limited options, especially when the options of keeping the existing water supplies are very costly. You know, so this is what had been researched. Numerous administrations have looked at different options, but this is the option that was affordable, provided capacity, met the treatment standards. So those are the three things that had to be met in order for us to provide water. Had we not done what we've done, and someone got sick, you can just imagine what the ramifications would have been for something like that. So, you know, it's definitely a balancing act between all the different concerns and considerations that are out there. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming.